I was standing in my garage, waxing my old Ford pickup the way I do every Saturday morning, when my phone buzzed on the workbench. I figured it was my buddy Carl reminding me about the fishing trip we'd been planning for 3 weeks. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost didn't pick up at all. It wasn't Carl. The name on the screen was Martin Holloway, my attorney. Martin had handled my affairs for going on 15 years. Wills, property transfers, the business sale when I retired. He was not a man who called on Saturday mornings. He was not a man who called without a scheduled appointment. Ever. I set down the wax cloth and answered. "Harold," he said. And I knew right away something was wrong. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. Martin Holloway is the kind of man who sounds composed when he's delivering news that would make other people fall apart. But that morning, his voice had an edge I had never heard in 15 years. "I need you to come in Monday. First thing." I asked him what this was about. He paused. Martin Holloway never pauses. "It's about your daughter," he said, "and your granddaughter. Harold, I'm sorry to tell you this over the phone, but you need to know before Monday so you have time to think. What I've found, what I've uncovered in the past 72 hours, it changes things. It changes a lot of things." I sat down on the running board of that truck and I listened to him talk for the next 20 minutes. By the time he was done, the wax on my hood had dried into a chalky film and my coffee was stone cold on the workbench. I didn't move to fix either one. Let me back up, because to understand what Martin told me that morning, you need to understand my family. You need to understand how we got to that place. My wife, Patricia, passed away 4 years ago. Breast cancer. We had 38 years together, and I would take every hard day of those 38 years over a single day without her. When she died, the person I leaned on most was my daughter, Renee. She was 33 at the time, already married to a man named Derek, already the mother of my granddaughter, Lily, who was 7 years old and the absolute center of my world. Renee and I had always been close. After Patricia passed, we got even closer, or so I believed. She called me every few days. I watched Lily on weekends. I taught that little girl to fish. I helped her with her homework. I was at every school play, every soccer game, every single birthday. Lily used to run to my truck the moment it pulled into their driveway. She'd wrap her arms around my neck and say, "Pops is here." That was her name for me. Pops, hence the channel. Derek, my son-in-law, was another story. I want to be fair here, because I know only my side of things and I know how these stories can go. But I also know what I saw with my own eyes and what I felt in my gut over 4 years of watching that man operate. Derek was the kind of person who smiled when someone was looking and dropped the smile the moment they looked away. He had a way of steering conversations, of redirecting things, of making you feel like you'd misunderstood something that you were absolutely certain you'd understood correctly. Renee loved him. I accepted that. I kept my mouth shut. About 8 months ago, things started to change. Renee stopped calling as often. When I did reach her, she seemed distracted, rushed, always somewhere else in her head. Lily's weekend visits got shorter, then less frequent, then stopped altogether. Every time I asked, there was an excuse. Lily had a birthday party. Lily had a sleepover. Lily had a cold. Lily had a school project. I started to wonder if Derek had something to do with it, but I told myself I was being a suspicious old man. I told myself I needed to give them space. I told myself that Renee was a grown woman who could manage her own life. Then 2 months ago, I got a letter. It was formal, typed on legal letterhead, but not Martin's firm. A different attorney, one I didn't recognize. It informed me that Renee and Derek had decided to restructure family boundaries. That phrase, I remember it exactly. Restructure family boundaries, and that going forward, all contact with Lily would need to be coordinated through Derek's schedule. There was a list of conditions. I was not to arrive unannounced. I was not to take Lily anywhere without written notice 48 hours in advance. I was not to discuss sensitive family matters with Lily, which was defined so broadly it seemed to cover nearly any real conversation. I read that letter 3 times. I called Renee. It went to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted. She replied 2 days later with a single line. "Dad, this is for the best. I'll explain when things settle down." Things never settled down. I drove to their house. Derek answered the door. He stood in the frame with his arms crossed and told me, calmly and without any particular emotion, that Renee wasn't available and that he thought it was best if I respected the letter's terms while everyone had some time and space. He said it the way you'd say something to a stranger, polite, measured, utterly cold. I stood on my own daughter's porch, and I looked at that man, and I said, "Derek, I just want to see my granddaughter." He said, "I know, Harold. We'll be in touch." And he closed the door. That was 6 weeks before Martin called me on that Saturday morning. I had retained Martin after receiving the letter not to start a fight, but to understand my rights as a grandparent. Georgia, where we all live, has grandparent visitation statutes, but they're complicated, and they depend heavily on circumstances. Martin had been doing research. He'd been looking into the situation, and in the course of that research, he had found something that had nothing to do with visitation law and everything to do with why Derek wanted me out of Lily's life. Monday morning, I was in Martin's office at 8 o'clock sharp. He had a file folder on his desk. He slid it across to me before he even said good morning. "I want you to look at that before I say anything," he said. "I want you to see it with fresh eyes." I opened the folder. The first document was a property record. A house not Renee and Derek's house. A different address in a subdivision about 40 minutes from where they lived. Purchased 11 months ago. The buyer's name was Derek Allen Morrow, my son-in-law's name. But the co-buyer's name was not Renee. It was a woman named Cassandra Fowler. I looked up at Martin. He nodded slowly. "Keep going," he said. The next pages were financial records not illegally obtained, Martin was careful to explain, but accessed through legal discovery processes after he'd filed a preliminary motion. Derek had been systematically moving money. Joint accounts he shared with Renee had been drained in increments small enough to avoid immediate flags. Over 14 months, approximately $212,000 had been transferred, routed through 2 intermediate accounts, and deposited into an account held solely by Derek. My daughter didn't know. I sat there in that leather chair in Martin's office, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day Patricia was diagnosed. That specific, awful feeling of the ground shifting, of realizing that the world is not the shape you thought it was. "There's more," Martin said. He wasn't being cruel. He just needed me to know everything. He turned to the last section of the folder, bank statements, purchases, and then a series of screenshots. These had been provided, he told me carefully, by a third party who had contacted his office after seeing the preliminary motion in the court filing system. Someone who knew Derek, someone who had seen things. The screenshots were text messages between Derek and Cassandra Fowler going back nearly 2 years. I'm not going to repeat what was in them, but I will tell you that the last message in the chain, sent 3 weeks before Derek handed me that letter about restructuring family boundaries, said this: "She's starting to figure it out. I need to lock down the dad situation before this blows up. If he's out of the picture, she won't have anyone pushing her to dig deeper." I was the dad situation. He had cut me off from Lily, from my own granddaughter, not to protect his family, not out of any principle or genuine concern. He had cut me off because I was the person most likely to notice something was wrong, because he knew that if I was around, if I was talking to Renee, if Lily was spending weekends at my house and telling me things kids tell their grandparents, the whole thing would unravel faster. He had used my granddaughter as a tool to isolate my daughter. I closed the folder. I set it on Martin's desk very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands are not entirely steady. I looked at my attorney of 15 years and I said, "What do we do?" Martin leaned forward. "We have options," he said. "But Harold, I need to ask you something first, and I need you to answer honestly. What is your priority here? Because this can go several directions, and the direction we choose depends on what you want to protect most." I didn't have to think about it for even a second. "Renee," I said. "And Lily. That's it. That's the whole list." He nodded. "Then here's what I think we do." We didn't go in swinging. That was Martin's advice, and it was the right advice, though every part of me wanted to drive straight to that house and put everything I knew on the table in the loudest possible way. Martin talked me out of it. He explained, and he was right, that if Derek felt cornered before we had everything secured, he would move the money again, possibly offshore, possibly in ways that would be very difficult to trace. We needed to be methodical. We needed to let the legal process do what the legal process is designed to do. Martin filed a motion. Derek's attorney responded. There were hearings I attended and hearings I wasn't required to attend. There were documents submitted and documents requested. All of it took weeks that felt like years. But here is the thing about doing things the right way. It works. During those weeks, I called Renee every single day. Most days, she didn't answer. Some days she answered and was brief, distracted, clearly monitored in some way. I could feel it through the phone, the way her voice flattened when she heard mine. But I kept calling. Every day. Not to tell her what I knew. Not yet Martin had advised me to wait on that, but just so she knew I was there. Just so she knew that no matter what she'd been told about me, no matter what story had been constructed around my absence, I had not stopped calling. I had not gone anywhere. One Tuesday night, late, almost 11 o'clock, my phone rang. It was Renee. She was crying before she said a word. "Dad," she said, "I think something is really wrong. I've been trying to figure out our accounts, and I can't, the numbers don't, Dad. I don't know what's happening." I sat down on the edge of my bed. I kept my voice as calm and steady as I could make it. "I know," I said. "I've known for a few weeks. I didn't tell you because I was waiting for the right moment and because I needed to make sure you were protected before it all came out. But I know, sweetheart, and you are going to be okay. I promise you, you are going to be okay." She cried for a long time. I stayed on the phone. When she was ready to talk, I told her about Martin's folder. I told her about Cassandra Fowler and the house and the $212,000. I told her about the text messages. I told her, and this was the hardest thing I have ever said to my daughter. I told her that the reason she had been cut off from me was not random, was not about family dynamics or space or boundaries. It was calculated. She had been deliberately isolated from the one person who might have helped her see what was happening. The silence on the phone after I said that was one of the longest silences of my life. Then she said, "I need to get Lily and go somewhere safe tonight." I said, "You can come here, right now, tonight. I'll have your old room ready in 20 minutes. She came. She arrived at my house at 12:47 inches the morning with Lily asleep over her shoulder and one bag packed. I held the door open. I took the bag. I put Lily down in the guest room the way I used to put Renee down when she was small, pulling the blanket up to her chin and sitting on the edge of the bed for a moment, just watching her breathe. Then I went downstairs and I sat with my daughter at the kitchen table, and we talked until 4 in the morning. She told me things she had never told me, not because she was hiding them, but because she hadn't understood what she was seeing. The small disappearances of money, explained away. The weekends Derek was at work, accounted for with stories that had seemed plausible. The way conversations about finances always seemed to redirect, always ended with her feeling foolish for asking. The slow, grinding erosion of her confidence that she hadn't even recognized as erosion because it had happened so gradually, over years. I listened to all of it. I did not say "I told you so," not once, because she didn't need that and it wouldn't have been entirely honest anyway. I hadn't known exactly. I had suspected, in the vague way fathers suspect things they can't quite name. That's not the same as knowing. What I said instead was this: "None of this is your fault. Not a single piece of it." She looked at me across the kitchen table with red eyes and said, "Why didn't I see it?" I said, "Because you trusted him. Because trusting the people you love is not a character flaw. It's what love looks like. He took advantage of that. That's on him. That will always be on him." The legal proceedings moved quickly once Renee became an active participant. With her cooperation, Martin was able to access records that had previously required court orders to obtain. Derek's financial maneuvering, which had seemed elaborate, turned out to be not quite as clever as he thought. Money that has been moved leaves trails. Cassandra Fowler, when deposed, was not particularly loyal to someone who had apparently also been less than honest with her. Derek's attorney tried several approaches. None of them worked. The documentation was too thorough and too clear. In the end, the settlement took 4 months to finalize. Renee received the family home, full physical custody of Lily, child support, and a substantial portion of the marital assets, including a forensic accounting recovery of most of the $212,000. Derek moved out in March. I was there that day, not to confront him, not to say anything at all. I was there because Renee asked me to be there. I stood in the driveway while the movers loaded boxes, and I watched Derek carry his own things to his car, and I felt, honestly, very little. Not triumph, not anger, just the quiet settling of something that had been wrong for a long time finally becoming less wrong. Lily was at school during all of that. Renee had been careful about what Lily knew and didn't know, calibrating it to what an 11-year-old could hold without it becoming a weight she'd carry forever. Kids understand more than we think, and they also need to be protected from more than we sometimes remember. Renee was thoughtful about it. I was proud of her for that. The first weekend, after everything was finalized, Lily came to my house on a Friday afternoon. Renee dropped her off, and I watched that little girl jump out of the car and come running across the lawn, and I thought about that last day I'd stood on their porch, when Derek had closed the door in my face and told me they'd be in touch. Lily hit me like a small freight train. Arms around my middle, face buried in my jacket. "Pops," she said, "I missed you so much. Mom said we're going fishing tomorrow. Can we make pancakes first?" I held on to her for a moment longer than I normally would. She didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't mind. "We can make pancakes," I said. "We can make as many pancakes as you want." We stayed up too late that Friday night, the way we always used to. I taught her how to play gin rummy, which she beat me at twice, which I am still not fully convinced was beginner's luck. We watched half an old movie before she fell asleep on the couch, and I carried her to the guest room, the same room her mother had slept in 4 months earlier, arriving at midnight with one bag and a sleeping child. I sat on the edge of that bed again and I watched her breathe. Same as I had that first night. Same as I've done since she was born. There are things you can't get back once they're gone. Time is the main one. Those months when I was locked out, when Lily was growing and changing, and I wasn't there for any of it, I don't get those back. That is a real loss, and I don't want to minimize it by wrapping this up too neatly. But here is what I've learned, at 63 years old, after everything. The people who try to isolate you from the ones who love you are always afraid of something. They are afraid of being seen clearly. They are afraid that if the right people stay close enough, the truth will find its way out. And they are usually right to be afraid of that, because it does. It almost always does. It just sometimes takes longer than it should. I stayed. I kept calling. I didn't make it a war, because a war would have hurt the two people I was trying to protect. I let Martin do what he does. I sat at my kitchen table at 4 in the morning, and I listened when my daughter finally needed to talk. That's all I did. And it was enough. Last Sunday, Renee came for dinner and brought Lily, and the three of us sat on the back porch after we ate and watched the fireflies come up out of the grass the way they do in Georgia in late spring. Lily decided she was going to catch one and spent 20 minutes running around the yard with cupped hands, laughing every time she missed. Renee sat next to me in the old porch chair that used to be Patricia's chair, and she put her head on my shoulder the way she did when she was 7 years old, and she said, "I'm sorry it took me so long, Dad." I said, "You have nothing to apologize for." She said, "I mean it." I said, "I know. So do I." We watched Lily catch her firefly. She held it up to show us, this tiny blinking light cupped between her palms, and she was so delighted, so entirely pleased with herself and with that small, ordinary miracle, that I had to look away for a second. Patricia would have loved this, I thought. She would have loved every single second of this. And then Lily let the firefly go, because that's what you do. And it rose up and disappeared into the dark yard with all the others, and Lily turned around and grinned at us from across the grass. "Did you see it, Pops?" she called. "Did you see?" "I saw it, sweetheart," I said. "I saw the whole thing.